Now that we have Season 1 under our belt, I think it's time to take a look at how Season 2 of Adventure Time raised the bar in every conceivable way. With deeper stories, flashier animation, and wackier adventures, there's a ton to look forward to as I rank and review the second season of Adventure Time. With a new groovy soundtrack and even funnier puns, I promise this tier list is gonna be every bit as mathematical as the last one. It came from the Nightosphere. The season starts out strong, with Finn helping Marceline confront her daddy issues. After hearing about her Fry-related trauma, Finn decides to reunite the broken family, unwittingly unleashing a Lovecraftian-level horror on the land of Ooo. Anson Abedier is a great new addition to the world, with his mild-mannered aloofness mixed with his unbridled evilness, making him an extremely engaging villain. Not only is his character design great, but the Deadlights-like animation we see when he's sucking the souls of his victims is especially horrifying. Getting to see Marcy and Finn work as a team to stop Hudson from stealing all the souls in Ooo is a great treat, as her drive for vengeance, contrasted against Finn's desire to save people, provides some interesting conflict. Watching their good cop, bad cop dynamic develop is refreshing, especially considering that Jake sits this episode out. The day being saved by Finn sharing Marceline's personal music with her dad, leading them to reconcile, is a really sweet moment, which is quickly undercut by Finn, brutally and efficiently sending Hudson back to the Nightosphere where he came from. I mean, dealing with toxic parents is exhausting enough without them threatening the souls of all your friends. This episode goes above business time. In The Eyes, exhausted after a long week of adventuring, the boys try to hit the hay, but can't when they realize they're being stalked by a suspicious horse. When their insomnia starts to get the best of them, the boys try various ways to get rid of the uninvited visitor. The montage of Finn and Jake adventuring that we get at the beginning of the episode is really enjoyable, especially considering that most of the episode takes place around the treehouse. The drowsy yet increasingly paranoid energy the boys have while trying to get rid of the horse is hilarious. It's crazy to see how quickly they go from trying to Pied Piper the horse away from the treehouse to putting an aerial hit out on it. When the horse is finally revealed to be Ice King creeping on them, the boys beat an explanation for his stalking out of him. Ice King's motivation being him watching Finn and Jake to learn how to be happy is a somber moment for the character, especially because it isn't resolved as the boys pass out in his arms as soon as they realize he isn't a real threat. I guess they were more comfortable with the devil they knew than the one they didn't. This episode goes below Henchman. In loyalty to the king, Ice King gets acquainted with pretty privilege when his new look starts attracting princesses. So, using his alias of the Nice King, he enlists Finn and Jake to help him control his harem of princesses. It's funny seeing how reluctant Finn is to being the Nice King's matchmaker, while Jake slips into the authoritative role almost immediately. This episode does a great job highlighting the diverse designs of all the princesses of Ooo. The shallow way Ice King uses his newfound attractiveness to devalue his female suitors is disappointing, but not really a surprising turn for the character. After a long day of rejecting princesses, it's nice to see that Finn draws a line at enabling LSB's body dysmorphia when Ice King encourages her to get rid of her lumps. In the end, when Ice King's whiskers start to grow back, the boys finally realize the Nice King's real identity, and allow the princesses to enact their own justice. I guess, no matter how fresh your cut is, you can't hide the ugliness underneath. This episode goes above Donnie. In Blood Under the Skin, Finn gets roasted by a group of knights for showing off his inferior protection. Overcome with armor envy, he sets out on a quest to attain the best full-body armor in Ooo. This episode is our introduction to Choose Goose, the silly merchant that only speaks in rhymes. The quest he sends Finn on to get his full-body armor reminds me of the plot of the Enchiridion, but instead of Finn taking on trials to test his heroism, This time Finn is just trying to get to the armor without dying of embarrassment. While Finn has to deal with the shame of being seen as a perv, being babied, and having to practice sphincter control, Sir Slicer, the leader of the Knights, follows him, rubbing the awkward situations in his face the whole way. When they finally get to the armor, Finn is let down by it being more Rubenesque than he expected. Though he discards it, the confidence he sees Jake wear it with gives him a new perspective on embarrassment. Finn learns that as long as you're secure in your own skin, other people's insults really just highlight their own insecurity. I guess in the end, size doesn't really matter as long as you know what to do with it. This episode goes under the eyes. In this episode, when Jake feels under the weather, Finn tries his hand at storytelling to help him feel better. Intent on rustling up a real story that meets all of Jake's stipulations, Finn ventures into the forest where his determination to heal Jake almost runs him into the ground. Literally. We get a quick shift in tone in this episode, as Finn's wholesome, aloof approach to story gathering quickly changes to a more hands-on strategy. The lengths Finn goes to fulfill Jake's wishes are horrifying, as after committing essay and child abuse, he finally draws the line at infanticide. After a full day of Finn harassing all the inhabitants of the forest to force a story with violence, romance, and suspense out of them, he gets exactly what he asked for when they jump him and drag him into court. Facing a life sentence of being buried in the earth's soil, Finn gives an empowering speech to the animals, urging them to live their truths.
And Mrs. Cow, take that bag off your udder. You're a beautiful girl. You live in the forest, so why don't you just let it hang out?
Yo, put that bag back on!
Well, at least almost everybody gets a happy ending. With Jake finally healed and satisfied by Finn's tale, I guess this time the truth didn't get in the way of a good story. This episode goes above the witch's garden. In Slow Love, a surprise attack from a lonely snail named Snorlock puts the treehouse in danger. When he tells the boys he's having lady trouble, Finn and Jake hatch a plan to help the slimy simp successfully hook up. I think the late Biz Marquis provides a great voice performance for Snorlock, with his deep and slow voice perfectly complementing how slow his character's flirting skills are. Watching his character transform from a socially anxious wreck to a slimy sex symbol is a great progression. Also, the running joke of BMO being the punching bag of this episode is wild. Hell, even Jake ends up being a computer abuser. Anyways, no good deed goes unpunished when the boys' attempts to teach Snorlock how to flirt succeed, and they find out his love language is beatboxing. Jake then resorts to a biological attack when he realizes Snorlock's horniness is threatening what's still standing of the house. I really like the reveal that Snorlock was a slug that was mistaken for a snail the whole time. Of course, it makes sense that love comes slow when you're searching for it in all the wrong places. This episode goes above storytelling. Power Animal. Finn's unlimited energy makes him the life of the roof party, and also draws the attention of a sketchy stranger. Interested in using him as unlimited power for his machine, the Grandmaster of the Gnomes kidnaps Finn, causing Jake to have to overcome his ADHD to save his best friend. There's a ton of iconic moments in this episode, like the dancing bug, Jake laughing at his own jokes, and the introduction of Party God. While Jake gets all the funny moments in this episode, watching the physical and psychological abuse Finn goes through while waiting to be saved is quite the contrast. The sequence of Finn imagining himself breaking out of the Beneathiverse only to still be imprisoned is some heartbreaking stuff, and Jake beating himself up for how differently his brain works is another sadly relatable beat from this episode. Luckily, everything works out in the end, as Jake's lackadaisical approach leads him to Party God, who imbues him with the energy of 1,000 partying demons, which helps Jake save Finn from the gnomes with ease. It's nice to see that when Jake's unfocused, rowdy energy is empowered, he easily saves the day. This episode goes above the Duke. In Crystals Have Power, we get the return of Tree Trunks, who's now the evil queen of the Crystal Dimension. When she tries to rob a cradle with Finn and force him to be her Crystal King, Jake has to decide if keeping his new pacifist ways is worth letting Finn get crystallized. We get some fresh Jake lore in this episode, when his dad appears in a dream and introduces us to his brother Jermaine. With Jake focusing on not perpetuating the violence of his past, we get a funny sequence of him trying to save Finn through casual conversation, Jedi mind tricks, and peacocking. I can't lie though, with the amount of episodes we already have of the boys failing at being non-violent, this plot really just feels redundant. And though the design of the Crystal Dimension isn't really anything to write home about, we do get some pretty cool lighting effects in this episode. I was honestly surprised the creators chose to put 2 episodes where Finn gets kidnapped back to back. But luckily, Jake breaks the 4th wall to acknowledge the similarities between the 2 episodes.
If I had a penny for every time someone went crazy hopped up on magic energy, I'd be Abraham Lincoln.
Anyways, after some familial encouragement, Jake finally lets himself Hulk out, kicking the remnants of the crystal gem apple out of Tree Trunk's gut. With the sweet horny old lady that we know and loved back, and Finn no longer the apple of her eye, the group heads back to Ooh for some homemade pie. This episode goes above the jiggler. In the other Tarts, when Princess Bubblegum retires her senile royal tart toter, she hires Finn and Jake to DoorDash her coveted royal tarts to the annual back rubbing ceremony. Thinking PB's head is on the line, Finn pulls a sweet switcheroo, sending Cinnamon Bun on the easy path with some decoy poison tarts, while the boys take an alternate route through the dangerous Desert of Doom. I always love a good traveling adventure, and the amount of great visual jokes we get utilizing Jake's shapeshifting to get the dessert through the desert is fun to watch. The biggest obstacle in this episode being Finn's hubris is hilarious, as watching the boys' supply of royal tarts get whittled away by various threats that Finn creates lies in stark contrast to the cushy royal tart path that they should have just stayed on. Anyways, after the boys lose the last of their tarts to a butterfly and a stick-up, they rush to the ceremony where they realize Finn fumbled the bait and switch, and that they've been carrying the poisonous tarts all along. With the real royal tarts delivered and PB's admission that she exaggerated the danger she was in, everyone is satisfied, until the old tart toter crashes the party and delivers the most haunting and esoteric speech in Adventure Time history.
And I'll still be here tomorrow to high-five you yesterday, my friend. Peace.
This episode goes under his hero.
Sheesh.
In this episode, Finn has to cut a woman's hair when a balding tree witch asks our heroes for help making her look beautiful. When Jake's smooth-talking fails to raise her spirits, the witch raises the stakes, forcing Finn to rush to get a hold of some princess hair before Jake is permanently buried in the witch's bowels. Finn's accidental riz is in full force in this episode, as Princess Muscles and LSP jump at the chance to court him. When his desperation to save Jake leads him to the point of grave robbing, and still doesn't solve the problem, Finn sets up a speed date with Princess Bubblegum, who immediately understands and hands over some of her gummy hair. With Jake's stinky situation reaching its event horizon, and the tree witch rejecting Finn's offering, he has no other choice but to let his true emotions out, calling her out for how ugly she is, inside and out. It's honestly interesting the boys didn't try to point her in the direction of another obnoxious magic user we know. Anyways, Finn's scolding is successful, and the witch releases Jake from her bottomless bottom. In return for her doing the right thing, Finn offers up his own luscious locks to satisfy the witch. In the end, you can always count on Finn to come in with a close shave. This episode goes above Crystals Have Power. In this episode, Finn and Jake find Ice King's hidden chamber of frozen blades, after they get a tip that he's still up to his old princess-stealing ways. When the boys decide to snoop around his empty abode, they uncover Ice King's deepest secret, that he's a giant weeb. I love the animation of the action we get in this episode, as the boys learn to master the dangerous art of Frigitsu. Watching Finn and Jake invade Ice King's privacy is engaging enough, But when they ramp up to destroying Ice King's house and belongings in the pursuit of becoming master ninjas, the stakes are adequately raised. When Ice King returns home from the B-plot of him getting Gunter checked out by Dr. Princess, the boys feel indebted to help him out, until it's quickly revealed not much has changed about his character. With the boys ready to rip him a new one, and the reveal that Gunter wasn't sick, just pregnant with a floating pink cat, this episode's climax felt a little too heavy on the lol random early 2010s humor for me. Apparently an early version of the episode's storyboard had Gunter give birth to an Ice King penguin hybrid instead of a cat. So I guess I should just be glad we got an ending that doesn't have such beastly implications. And although the boys failed at the silent part of their infiltration, they're still able to give Ice King a deadly takedown. This episode goes below the Duke. In this episode, when Jake is anxious about meeting Princess Rainicorn's parents, he gets ahead of himself and invites the in-laws over early. But when he realizes her parents might be bigoted against dogs, Jake does rainbow face to try to win over their approval. I think this episode is a great depiction of the turmoil that can come with trying to integrate family members of different cultures and generations. With Lady Rainicorn out of the picture for their introduction, we get to see the damage caused by the assumptions made on both sides. And while the lore we get about the Rainicorn and Dog Wars is pretty cool, watching Jake allow Finn to get mistreated to the point that he almost becomes the parents' colorful cuisine is pretty disappointing. Luckily in the end, Jake stands up for himself and his culture, and learns his presumptions about Lady's parents were wrong, and that she has more to be insecure about since her parents are huge dog lovers. After an episode of Finn taking his lumps to help assist Jake, it's nice that in the end he realizes the phrase "homies help homies" goes both ways. This episode goes above the witch's garden. In the pods, Finn and Jake help a dying gnome knight with his task of guarding 3 magical beans. When they learn one of the bean pods contains a horrible evil, the boys decide to plant them so they can attack the problem head on. This episode is a great show of how overambitious Finn and Jake can be at handling quests, but watching them try to suss out the evil pod really exposes their blind spot for cuteness. When the pods sprout adorable baby pigs and some magical wands, the boys are pretty sure the 3rd pod is going to be their evil culprit. But when it finally opens up and turns out to be a buffet of harmless ice cream, they have to come to terms with the fact that they armed and let the danger grow right under their noses. With the evil piglets laying siege on the fun guys in Mushroom Town, and Finn and Jake outnumbered, it seems like all is lost, until Finn figures out their secret weakness is lactose intolerance, and saves the day. I guess in the end, if you judge a book by its cover, just be ready to reap what you sow. This episode goes above loyalty to the king. In The Silent King, Finn becomes king of the goblins after casting out their abusive ex-leader Zergiok. But trying to fill the power vacuum proves harder than he expected, when the traumatized goblins have a hard time adjusting to Finn's lax leadership. Though this episode has a ton of fun flashbacks and dream sequences, watching the abject subjugation the goblins expect from their new leader is extremely sad and hard to watch. Without the corporal punishment the subjects have come to expect, we get a scary sense of the codependent relationships the subjects had with their previous abusive ruler. So, in an attempt to empower the subservient goblins, the boys decide to take on Zergiok and his army of Earcolopses on their own, with our first introduction to Finn using the Jake suit. Luckily, the boys make quick work of the army, using sonic attacks to exploit the Earcolopses' obvious weakness. With the spanking superior Slade and a new Puppet King put in Finn's place, the boys get a happy ending as they walk off into the sunset. This episode goes above the eyes. In The Real You, Ben gets anxious when Princess Bubblegum invites him to speak at her TED Talk. But when independent study and academia fail to make Finn feel smart enough for the task, he resorts to psychoactive means to give him a whole new perspective on life. This episode is a lot of fun, as we get to watch Finn's journey to come up with a lecture he feels is worthy of PB's Super Science Barbecue, as his simple heroic mindset clashes with her highly intellectual framework of knowledge. Luckily, when he's out of options, his local dealer Choose Goose comes through and provides some psychedelic glasses that are able to expand Finn's mind and perspective instantly. With his newfound perception of reality raising his confidence, Finn decides to give a lecture on multidimensional bubbles, which leads him to open a black hole that threatens all the patrons of the conference. As Finn's expanded consciousness and scientific hubris leads him to force a NDE on his constituents, PB gives Finn a trip killer as she convinces Finn to take off his psychedelic spectacles. With our average intelligence Finn back in action, he uses his new fourth dimensional blade to take out the black hole, and we get the reveal that this was the big brain Finn's plan all along. With an elated crowd of scientists and a kiss from the princess, Finn finally feels satisfied and gets a well-deserved nap. This episode goes above Freak City. Guardians of Sunshine, Finn and Jake's gaming session gets a little too real when the boys struggle to kill the unbeatable final boss, Sleepy Sam. So they decide to get hands-on and sneak into the virtual game against BMO's wishes. But the stakes get raised when they realize dying in the game means a game over IRL. This is a fun episode as it's the first time we get 3D animation in the show. I really like how the polygonal character designs provide a retro video game aesthetic. We also get a really relatable plot as the boys are motivated by their stubborn conviction to beat the final boss, which makes sense since I too have spent more hours than I'm willing to admit struggling to 100% my favorite video games. Anyways, when Jake tries to glitch the game and go out of bounds, our antagonists do the same, exiting the virtual world with our heroes. Though the characters seem non-violent at first, they quickly reveal their plan to destroy BMO to avoid being put back in the game. So in the end game, Finn has to come in clutch and use the Konami code to defeat Sleepy Sam once and for all. After a day of the boys pushing BMO's buttons, it's only right that the console consoles himself by sending them to the game over screen. This episode goes under What Is Life? In Death in Bloom, Princess Bubblegum tasks Finn and Jake with babysitting her special princess plant. But when their over-the-top antics put the shrub in a slump, the boys literally have to go to hell and back to give the plant another chance at life. Finn and Jake have a weird journey through the land of the dead in this episode, as they face a useless bouncer, some flesh-obsessed skeletons, and an avalanche caused by Jake's flatulence. And though most of the episode's moments are pretty lighthearted for a hangout in hell, Jake losing his memory in the River of Forgetfulness is a pretty heavy moment for the show. Anyways, instead of facing 9 rings of torment, the boys' ultimate task is defeating death in a music battle for the soul of PB's plant in Jake's memory. When Finn fails to slay the sleigh bells and the demon destroys on the drums, it seems like all is lost, until our hero mentions his connection to Peppermint Butler, and immediately wins Death's favor. In the end, the boys and the plant get sent back home, right as Princess Bubblegum returns on the morrow. I guess it turns out, even all the way in the underworld, all you need to cheat death is good networking. This episode goes above the gut grinder. In this episode, Finn finally feels less alone when he finds a group of primitive humans squatting underground, led by the statuesque Susan Strong. But when Finn takes on the task of teaching her the ways of the surface world, things backfire when the Drain Dwellers set their sights on consuming the Candy Kingdom. Some of Finn's best heroic traits are on display in this episode, as he revels in teaching Susan the ropes to the real world. I like how Susan's fearful disposition and broken English come across as adorable, until it's clear she isn't following Finn's lead anymore and starts to delve into her more animalistic tendencies. After the boys introduce Susan to the Candy Kingdom, they realize she and her clan have an insurmountable sweet tooth, and plan to chow down on the Candy Town. Here Finn realizes he might have taught her too much, as his attempts to recreate the fearful platonic cave they came from failed to deter the animal-wearing attackers. Luckily, some accidental s'mores even the score, scorching the intruders and exposing that under their animal hats are gills. So in the end, Susan scampers off, leaving her human or humanoid status up in the air.
Do you think she was human? Or just another wild animal?
We're all wild animals, brother.
This episode goes under her parents. In this episode, Finn and Jay take a mystery train to get to Finn's birthday surprise. But when the passengers of the train start to get picked off one by one, Finn goes into detective mode to try to figure out who the murderous culprit is. Despite its cheerful, easygoing tone, this episode has all the hallmarks of your classic Agatha Christie murder mysteries. With a car of captive suspects and a suspicious red herring conductor, Finn resorts to some clue-style investigation to come to a conclusion on the killer. But before he can get his monologue on the monorail out, Finn finds himself and the conductor to be the only ones left alive on the locomotive. Ready to avenge his best friend and the other passengers, Finn chases the conductor to the engine, where he finds out he was Jake all along. It turns out the murder mystery was part of Jake's birthday surprise for Finn, and that the truth was hidden in train sight the whole time. So, at the end of the line, everybody disembarks and gets to enjoy some sweet birthday cake. I guess all it takes for a good birthday surprise is to know how to cover your tracks. This episode goes below Susan Strong. In Go With Me, Finn enlists Marceline to help him get Princess Bubblegum to join him for couples-only movie night. But when Jake's plan to court the princess is a bit too cold, and Marceline's is a little too hot, Finn has to figure out the amount of Riz that's just right. It's pretty funny that the first interaction between Marceline and PB we get in this show is Finn trying to make the princess jealous of her, especially as we'll get to learn more about their relationship as the show progresses. Also seeing Jake's hopeless romantic style, contrasted against Marceline's wild ways, provides some great conflict as they both go to extremes to try to set Finn up with his movie date. After Finn finally goes too far and gets banished from the Candy Kingdom, he sets his sights on the girl that's been in front of him the whole time. Though Marceline tries her best to deter Finn from trying to court her, once they get on the same page and understand Finn doesn't want a girlfriend and just wants someone to help him get into couples movie night, the date is set.
Yeah, as friends,
Of course as friends.
but no tongue.
In the end, they get there and realize all the lovey-dovey action isn't quite their scene, and the two tear out of the theater. This episode goes above Ricardio the Heart Guy. In this episode, when Finn and Jake hear screams coming from inside an agitated monster, the boys jump into the belly of the beast to save a bunch of bears. But before the boys can warn them they're getting down in a monster's gut, the bear's chief makes the newcomers prove they know how to party hard. This episode has some great atmosphere, as the strobing lights and deafening music perfectly encapsulate the feel of struggling to talk to someone at a rave. The Bears' chief Party Pat's super laid-back style also highlights the danger that can come from using parties for escapism, rather than just as a way to celebrate. Anyways, once the boys prove that they're true party animals, Party Pat shares their warning with the crowd, who don't care and go right back to raving. So when that doesn't work, Finn and Jake resort to the most tried and true way of ending a party, killing the vibe. Luckily, this happens at the same time the monster decides to take some lava laxatives that force a bear movement out the back door. In the end, with all the bears homeless, Party Pat makes a new negotiation to stay in the stomach location, this time without the fireworks that made the monster's belly hurt. This episode goes under Power Animal. In this episode, when the boys get sent into a labyrinth to save some hot dog nights, the Frankfurter's peer pressure causes Jake to stretch himself to the limit. So when the boys find out there's a creature that grants wishes at the end of the maze, Finn has to decide between his best friend's safety and his ultimate dream. There's a lot to get excited about in this episode, as we get to see the Sausage Party face various challenges as they maneuver through the maze. Watching the overambitious himbo hot dogs constantly hype Jake up to push himself beyond his boundaries starts out funny, but seeing how much of a people pleaser Jake becomes to make them happy quickly becomes hard to watch.
I'll never fall victim to peer pressure again.
Jake! Jake! Jake!
Actually, I'll do anything you guys want if you say my name 3 times.
Anyways, after they face a golem, some scorpions, and a cute kitty puzzle, the group finally comes upon a Quandrius who promises to give them each one wish. When the wieners waste their wishes and Jake spends his on a sandwich, it seems like all is lost, until Finn has a stroke of genius and wishes for his ultimate dream, the ancient psychic tandem war elephant. who then gets his own wish and uses it to heal all of Finn's friends. I guess in the end you can have your cake and eat it too. This episode goes under What Is Life. In this episode, Finn and Jake become video makers when they realize their film club has been hosting unauthorized viewings of movies, but making their own movie proves to be harder than they expected, when the boys' clashing directorial visions leaves their friendship in dire straits. I can really relate to the evolution of the boys' filmmaking that we see in this episode, as they start out capturing the natural beauty of ooh in a cinema verite style, and then quickly evolve to emulate more popular genres like action and rom-coms. This episode has a ton of meta jokes about the filmmaking process, from dangerous working conditions and limited funding, to Jake constantly trying to fit his favorite line into the movie.
Just something like, check please.
We get to see how working on a group project can quickly start to tear its creators apart. So in the end, when our directors are unable to reach a consensus on what they want out of the movie, we get to see that the real magic of filmmaking comes out in the editing room, when they task BMO with making the final cut. When the audience sits down for movie club, they're treated to a beautiful tribute to Finn and Jake's friendship, which reminds us all that the true point of art is to bring people together, not to tear them apart. This episode goes under It Came from the Nightosphere. In Mortal Folly, the stakes are raised to the highest they've ever been, when Finn and Jake have to take on the Lich before he can get to full power and end all of life in ooh. But tracking him down before he can get to his evil lair gets even harder than they expected when Ice King's annoying antics continuously get in the way. This epic adventure is the former episode of the first two-parter we get in the series, packing a ton of awesome lore and captivating animation. I wouldn't be surprised if you get whiplash from this one though, as watching the incredible world-ending stakes of this episode, contrasted against Ice King's regular silly princess-stealing ways, gets exhausting as intense scenes keep getting undercut by Ice King's bumbling behavior. I think it's cool we get to see the first depiction of Finn with a prosthetic arm in this episode, and I really love the detail of the Lich escaping by controlling the mind of the snail that's hidden in the background of each episode. Anyways, when they get to the Lich's well of power, the writers throw us a switcheroo when the gauntlet of the hero PB gives Finn fails, and it turns out all he needs to defeat the Lich is the power of love. In the end, the land of Ooh is saved and everyone is okay. Until...
Go free! Oops, I've got the dropsies.
I guess we should have known the greatest threat anyone can face would be Ice King's incompetence. This episode goes under business time. In Mortal Recoil, the boys help Princess Bubblegum recoup after being dropped in the Lich's well, but even though Finn turns a blind eye to her new weird behavior, it becomes increasingly clear she's under the command of a dark power. If you thought last episode had some intense scenes, the creepy animation of PB while she's being possessed by the Lich keeps the intense energy of this two-parter going. Watching Finn's ignorance of the obviously weird behavior she's showing is funny, but luckily the episode doesn't take too long to give Finn a reality check. We also see some decent character growth from Ice King, as he gets to acknowledge how creepy he's been and be the voice of reason to Finn about PB's possession. So, in an inverse of the climax of Mortal Folly, Finn's love doesn't save the day, Ice King does, using his ice power to immobilize the Princess Bubblegum Lich hybrid. Until...
Okay, I didn't kill her this time. Everybody saw that, right?
So, in a twist ending that sounds like a fanfic written by Finn himself, we find out the doctors could only salvage enough gum to bring PB back to life at the same age as Finn, 13. With this convenient revelation, it looks like we finally get a happy ending. For now, this episode goes above the eyes. Heat signature, we get a ghastly end to the season when Finn and Jake meet Marceline's old gang from the underworld. When the boys' floating FOMO leads them to want to become vampires, Marcy agrees to put them through vampire training, but the catch is she never actually gave them the bite. This episode is one long supernatural version of the trope of someone pretending to be drunk after they're given a non-alcoholic drink. Though Finn and Jake do come off a bit naive in this episode, watching the lengths Marceline goes through to pull off this vampiric prank helps their obliviousness go down a bit smoother. So, after they're taught a lesson in invisibility, and take their lumps getting jumped into the ghost gang, they finally get their lesson in floating, which goes about as well as you'd expect. When Marcy's murderous friends push Finn and Jake to their deaths, the close call forces her to come clean about her prank and admit they're still a regular human boy and a magic dog. In the end, the boys are saved from the soul-sucking ghouls when the B-movie they brought along is able to draw their attention, and they all drop what they're doing and go home for movie night.
Can we just go back to the brain eating or whatever?
After the movie.
Well, can't we just shh?
I guess if you've lived through enough life-threatening horrors, watching a scary movie can be pretty boring. This episode goes above the Duke. So now that the review section is done, I think it's time for an Adventure Time tier list rerun. Getting to analyze and rank this second season to see which episodes rise to the top has really painted a clearer picture of what makes this series so special. With the stronger stories and crazier characterization, we really get to see some meat added to the bones of the first season. It seems like the only way the show is going from here is up, so without further ado, here's the updated tier list for Season 2. Even though there weren't any episodes from Season 2 that made the S tier, I feel like this season was still well represented across the rest of the tiers. Huge shout out to all my subscribers that stuck around for Season 2. If you like the content but are impatient like me, feel free to follow me on TikTok to see me upload each episode as I progress through Season 3. And don't forget to leave a like and comment your favorite episode I covered. I'll see you next time, adventurers.
Sheesh.